Welcome back to the Tracy Take. I am Tyler here with my brother Ryan. Today we are reviewing the Jacksonville Jaguars 2024 offseason. They had a very unique offseason. They lost a couple good pieces, but also I think gained a lot of good pieces both in free agency and also in the draft. So we're going to review all of their moves. And at the very end of the video, we're going to break down their 2024 schedule and provide our record predictions for them. So be sure to stay tuned for the entire video. Before we get into it, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the Tracy Take, and also ring that bell to get notified when new videos come out. Videos come out Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, and we're doing an offseason recap for all 32 teams, so you're not going to miss out on how each team did this offseason. So with that being said, Ryan, let's pull up their team ranking. So Jacksonville Jaguars, unfortunately, just missed out on winning the division and the playoffs last year. I think people forget. I kind of forgot about it because I think the Eagles' collapse was so epic. It kind of came out of nowhere that you kind of forgot that the Jags also collapsed. I think they had one win in the final 6 weeks. That was against Carolina Panthers, where they did shut them out. So that's good. But they just really seemed they lost to the Bengals in overtime week 13, lost to the Browns by 4 points as well. And then they did have the injury to Trevor Lawrence as well, which made it very tough for him to come back in and for that team to kind of just get that one win that they needed to clinch the division. And unfortunately, just the worst case scenario happened for the Jags. They were dealing with a bunch of injuries. Christian Kirk also got injured and missed the remainder of the season. I believe it was the Baltimore Ravens game as well as, or maybe even a little bit before that. Oh, it was the Bengals game. I take that back. But it just compounding injuries, and then at the same time too, I think there was just some weaknesses on the defense side of the ball, which we'll get into here in a second because they lost some of their starting secondary players. That I think is going to have an interesting impact. But in general, though, I think it's very easy to overreact on this team's going to be bad this upcoming year because like you saw how they collapsed. But this team also then too had an epic rise at the end of the 2022 season, made a great playoff run, almost beat the Chiefs at home in the playoffs, and a lot of that still same core pieces of guys are there. And so, Ryan, I kind of want to throw it over to you when you kind of look at these stats here as well. Do you think the Jags improved on some of these numbers? Do you think, especially on the defensive side of the ball, do you think that they're going to be better than what some of these numbers show here?
I'm not entirely sure. I felt like the Jags did a lot of swapping out pieces this offseason. They didn't really upgrade or downgrade in any one specific area, but like for me, I just think it was like they just swapped out a lot of pieces. Like they lost a couple receivers, they got one in free agency, and then drafted another really high. So like that's kind of what they did in the secondary with some rotation, like some rotational guys as well. And so to me, I think looking at these numbers, the rushing game really, I think, is the biggest opportunity for improvement. They didn't allow a lot of sacks. They were right on the league average last year for sacks. And then actually were only 20, like they were 25th. They are the 25th most turnovers allowed, which feels very low now that I think about it. But like only 8. But I think like that's a really, really solid uh, turnover number there. And so looking at the offensive stats, where they could really improve is the running game. They had a top 10 passing offense last year. So again, this was a good offense. I think they just got decimated with injuries. And they also were missing Christian Kirk for a majority of the season. And he definitely will help improve this offense in 2024.
Yeah, yeah, no, and I think one thing too, especially with the rushing as well. Travis Etienne back there, they did get Tank Bigsby last year. I think if they keep improving that offensive line, keep protecting Trevor Lawrence, and keep building around them, then I think that it is going to slowly help because if they can get just an average running game as well, with how dynamic Travis Etienne can be in the backfield, I think that's something that we can really see this offense kind of maybe go up to that next level, but they just kind of need that development and also just need people to stay healthy. So let's quickly go on to the players that departed from the Jacksonville Jaguars here. And the big three to me are the first three: Calvin Ridley, Darius Williams, Rayshon Jenkins as well. I will say one thing: all these guys are over 30, but Darius Williams and Rayshon Jenkins, I think, played the most amount of time on the defensive side of the ball more than any of the other free agents. Rayshon Jenkins playing 98.9% of the snaps. Darius Williams 87.3%, according to Over the Cap here. And so, but I lose a lot of defensive players moved away. They did move on from Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones. I'm not as concerned about Zay Jones, but Calvin Ridley, I do think that at minimum, I like the projection of Brian Thomas Jr. Even if maybe it's a little bit of a step back
Yeah.
for the short term, I like the projection that Brian Thomas Jr. has. And also, too, then you combine that with Gabe Davis as well. I think both players, I think, are going to have a similar type role to what Calvin Ridley had in this offense. And I think combined, their production for 2024 is going to equal what Calvin Ridley was able to do in 2023, which, by the way, was, let me just go and get this.
It's like
here.
a little over 1,000 yards.
He was a 1,000-yard receiver off 76 catches. I will say a lot, his best games I felt were when Christian Kirk was on the field. If I were to go and look at the game breakdowns here, let me pull up the game breakdowns. Wherever that's at, right here for the 2023 season. I'm on Pro Football Reference here. Can I find the game breakdowns from this past year?
Well, I definitely think he had his best games early on in the season. Specifically, I think he almost had 200 yards against the Colts in week 1. So that's going to be like very beneficial for his stats. And he was a little bit more of a big play threat, more down the field, rather than a guy that was winning in and out of each down and being that possession receiver. And I think with Christian Kirk coming back, they have that. They got another downfield receiver at a much cheaper price in Gabe Davis, who we'll get to here later. And then they went out and drafted another one as well in Brian Thomas Jr. So for me, only a few guys that are still free agents. We kind of covered most of the departures here. And then Jamal Agnew and Trey Herndon are the two that are somewhat interesting. But I think both those guys were getting older and weren't playing as well as they had hoped, hence why they are still unsigned. So let's get into their free agent signings. So starting off, a few big ones: Eric Armstead, Gabe Davis, Mitch Morse, addressing the trenches on both sides of the ball, and then going and getting a wide receiver to replace Calvin Ridley that they lost. And then a few definitely went heavy on the defensive side of the ball with Darnell Savage, Terrell Edmonds, Ronald Darby, Travis Gibson, Trey Flowers, and then Ty Summers there to round it out. I think a lot of those guys will come in. They'll play some pretty significant rotational roles on the back end of this defense. And then also, excuse me, Devin Duvernay, I think is going to be a little bit of an underrated signing. I think he can kind of replace some of that Zay Jones production and then also help out in the new returning rules as well, kickoff rules.
Yeah. And so I think as well, we're talking about on the trenches. I think that this is huge for, especially to get Mitch Morse coming over from Buffalo. Pretty sure from Buffalo here. Yep. And so I think solidifying that interior of the offensive line, because honestly, you look at it, I like Anton Harrison, I like Cam Robinson, and then even Walker Little as well. I think that's a good trio of tackles that end if some guys get hurt or something like that. It's not the best in the league, but I think it's serviceable. But address that interior, I think you go get a solid center such as Mitch Morris come in and help kind of lead that offensive line. It's going to be huge for the team. But to your point, though, I think that addressing the secondary and getting a lot of pieces as well, getting some more bodies back there, trying to help out as much as possible in the passing game, and especially the two as we go to the depth chart here as well. In a second, I think you'll kind of see like how they're just trying to really get as many good guys as possible there to help out that front seven. The front seven of Jacksonville is actually pretty good. But I think the draft picks, I think they had a good draft as well. Brian Thomas Jr. I was able to go and confirm as well. So Christian Kirk got hurt in Week 13 against Cincinnati Bengals here. Before that game, Calvin Ridley had 3 games of over 100 yards. He didn't have any other game over 100. He had 1 game over 90. It was 2 games over 90, 1 game over 100 yards. That was the last week of the season against the Tennessee Titans. And so I think Christian Kirk is of the receiving room going to be the heart and soul of the receiving room here. So I think he's going to open up a lot more lanes for a guy like Brian Thomas Jr. And I think we saw what we saw Thomas Jr. do in college when he had a similar type player. Malik Neighbors probably better than Christian Kirk is, but still that guy who brings so much attention. I think Brian Thomas Jr. is going to be able to capitalize on that, maybe
Yeah.
even more than Calvin Ridley here as well. And then you get an experienced receiver like Gabe Davis, as you mentioned. I think it's going to help open up some more options. I think for this team, you just got to stay healthy, and the injury bug is a real thing. Sometimes teams suffer from it. So hopefully they don't, just so we can kind of keep seeing that great production that we know this Jacksonville Jaguars team can do.
Yeah. Yeah. And so just to kind of carry on with the draft picks here, I think they did a really good job of getting value later in this draft. And I think a lot of these guys will come in and play significant roles for them right away, or at least have the opportunity to play significant roles for them right away. So let's move on to the offensive depth chart here. So for me, you see Mitch Morris plugged right in as the starting center. Brian Thomas Jr. in the starting spot as one of the top three wide receivers, right? Like, I just think this is a really, really solid group. They have a really solid left tackle. At right tackle, Anton Harrison, as you mentioned. I think Javon Foster, the fourth round pick from Missouri, is going to be a great swing tackle for them. He played on that left side, but then also showed he can play on the right side at the Senior Bowl. So hopefully this offensive line is better this year. They can get more push in the run game. They can protect Trevor Lawrence even better because he did get banged up last year. So all in all, I think they did a really good job. Like, there's not one area on this offense that I think you can point to and be like, that is a true weakness because they did a good job of making this offense very well rounded.
Yeah. I try and look at these and see like what's the storyline going to be like in the areas I really want to watch. But to your point, though, there's not really. I mean, obviously, you want to see Brian Thomas Jr. see how he develops, how the new receiving room looks together,
Yeah.
and then you want to see how Mitch Morris and this offensive line comes together. But in general, though, yeah, I agree. You just look at this roster, be like, I would put this roster up. It's not the best roster in the league, but it's definitely above average, top 10, probably. And I think on any given day, if they play their best, they can go up against the best. And
Yeah.
so I think that's what's going to be very interesting, kind of as the season goes on and develops here. But I think the interesting part is going to be on the defensive side of the ball, kind of how this defense comes together. As we've already talked about a little bit, they've put a lot of emphasis on the secondary side because a lot of it too. You go look at that front seven: Trayvon Walker, Roy Robinson Harris. They added Eric Armstead, Josh Allen, right there. That's a very solid front four. And then you still have Devin
Yeah.
Lloyd, Foya Aluakon. He's from Atlanta, and then Ronald Darby as well, who they got in free agency. That's the cornerback there. But still, we'll get to him in a second. But still, that front six though, and then they have some decent depth pieces behind them as well. I agree with you. I think they got some good value late in the draft, such as again may fit there in the second round, guys that they can go and develop. So I think that front six that they have there is going to be solid. It's that secondary though. We're adding all of these
Yeah.
pieces, such as Ronald Darby. Go and get Darnell Savage as well. Can they just round them out and just be a little bit more aggressive in the passing game, a little bit more aggressive when it comes to their passing coverage as well? Because I think that's just going to be in this league now,
Yeah.
especially in the AFC. You're going to have quarterbacks and teams that can easily throw up 300 yards. Shoot, you go up against CJ Stroud and the Texans, and I mean they could go put up 300 yards against nearly any team in the league. I feel.
Yeah, and that for me, I think, especially in this division, you have some really solid receivers in Houston, Tennessee, and Indianapolis. This secondary, Ronald Darby is a good second or third corner, and I feel like he's probably the top guy. I mean, you have Tyson Campbell as well, but like that was my only critique of the draft was they could have taken Quinion Mitchell or any of these top corners in the first or honestly second round. They could have moved back up in the second and gotten Cooper DeJean or Kool-Aid McKinstry, and they ended up taking Brian Thomas Jr. over them. And uh, while that pick could pay dividends on offense, what was the lost opportunity there to add a key difference maker on the defensive side of the ball? Um,
Yeah.
So a little bit of a give and take there, but I think that's how the secondary shapes up. I think is going to be really interesting. And if there is a thing that keeps this team from getting over that hump in the playoffs, I think it is going to be this secondary. I just don't think they're going to be able to stop a lot of these teams that have some of these elite weapons. And again, that starts inside their division. So
Yeah, well, and I will say too, the secondary is going to get an immediate test to see if they're able to gel together or not. Because if we move
yeah,
forward to their 2024 schedule at Miami, that's going to be a fun one. It's going to be a good test. I'm probably just since it's the first game of the season, not even since the fact that it's Jacksonville, probably going to assume Tyreek Hill gets about 300 receiving yards this game. Now that he gets the people that they brought on, I don't even think it's even fair to give a good assessment of the secondary of Jacksonville during this time. But it's just because they're gonna be so explosive, they're gonna be so quick that I think it's gonna be a tough matchup that early on into the season here. But then Cleveland at Buffalo, at Houston, Indy, at Chicago, very tough stretch for this team. I believe in these first 6 games, you can come out around 500. I mean, I think that would be a win, but I think that's
yeah.
going to be tough. That's going to be really tough with this schedule.
Yeah, I mean, at Miami, at Buffalo on Monday Night Football, and then I it says at Chicago in London, but
Mm.
Chicago in London, that's going to be a tough game because Chicago has a really solid defense. That offense, we have no idea of what it's going to be. So I am not sure. I think, like you said, 3-3 would be a really, I think, solid record coming out of this first 6 games, especially new offensive weapons. I think this defense is going to be kind of figuring out what it's good at. Uh, 3-3 would be really solid. They do have a fairly nice, I guess, experiment that the NFL is doing. No team has ever played back-to-back games in London. So playing Chicago in Week 6, playing New England in Week 7, both games are in London.
They
So
did
curious to
last year.
see if that gives them. Oh, I
So
thought this was the first time that
no, they're the
they
only
did it.
team to do it, and so they'll have. So that's I'm
Oh,
going to
okay,
bet your
okay,
Patriots are going to lose. So
yeah,
just because they'll
yeah,
have that advantage. But that's where I was going to
yeah,
say, kind of build off of that. They do get. I think this middle section is going to be a good stretch for them. I mean, Green Bay is going to be tough. Philly will be tough, but then I think Minnesota, Detroit's going to be tough. So maybe still a little bit tougher, but they have easier games. So say either New England, there, Minnesota, Tennessee. So they can somehow be around 500. Then they could still be around 500 by week 14 because I think they have some opportunities to beat some of these teams here. But then wrapping up, though, I will say fairly easier schedule for the final 4 weeks, which is kind of when you want
yeah.
your easy games here. But Jets at home, who knows what's going to be up with them? At the Raiders, same thing with them. And then Tennessee and Indianapolis, teams that can be vulnerable if things don't work out. If Will Levis and Anthony Richardson don't develop the way that the teams had hoped, maybe they can capitalize here
Yeah.
and make a playoff push.
Yeah, and I definitely think like looking at this schedule, I think they'll be competitive in a lot of these games. There are teams that like Green Bay, I think they'll struggle with. Buffalo will be interesting because Buffalo is notorious for slow starts. Miami is the complete opposite. Like they're known for starting fast and simmering down towards the end of the year. So
Mm-hmm.
uh, this is a really good Jacksonville team. I think you hit the nail on the head. If it weren't for injuries, they would have won this division last year. So let's get into our record predictions here. So I think that they could go 10-7 with this schedule. I think back-to-back games in London, an easier second half of the schedule, in my opinion, than a first half. Uh, they get a decent bit of favorable matchups at home, and so I like the odds of the Jaguars being 10-7. I think this puts them in the wild card hunt, maybe in the hunt for the division, but I think the Texans are going to be tough to beat.
Yeah, the Texans I think are going to be tough to beat. And that was kind of my overall thought. Is I was thinking about which team to me I think improved the most over the offseason. And I think the Texans as well, with how well they performed, it came on strong there from the second half of the season. And then you go look at their free agent signings on top of that. I think that they're going to win this division, and I think it's going to be. I think they're going to match up well against Jacksonville. And I also think too, you kind of look at some of these other teams as of right now, and I know the Jags address the secondary, but even too now, Tennessee Titans have a great receiving room, or a really good receiving room. Indianapolis Colts have a really good receiving room. A team that struggled in the secondary and are now bringing in a bunch of new guys as well. It's going to take some time, I think, for them to mesh. And also, too, on top of that, I think see how this offense is able to go and develop here, and see if Brian Thomas Jr. can be the guy that they hope that he can be. I actually think he can. I just think it's going to be a really tough start to the season with those first 6 games, and then I think they going to have a couple of tough games like Green Bay, at Detroit, for example. Um, if they can be around 500 after that after their bye, there's a lot of opportunity because they do have 4 division games in their last 6 games here as well. I think the Jets can be vulnerable, and the Raiders are definitely vulnerable as well. I think it's going to be tough for them to be at 500. I just feel like they're going to be underdogs a lot in those first 11 games of the season. But who knows? So I think they're going to be around average 9-8 in the AFC. If it gets really crazy, like how we've seen in the past, that can get them a wild card spot. So that's definitely not still out of the playoff. 10-7. I think if they do that, I think that's a wild card spot. Potentially just with how crazy the AFC can get with all these teams beating them. So I think that they're still just on the outside looking in. Just based off of, well, I don't know. None of my opinions are based off anything, so take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I do think I think people's image of the Jaguars are slightly tainted based off how how the season ended for them last year. And I think a large part of that was just due to injuries. This offense fell off after Christian Kirk got hurt. Calvin Ridley wasn't enough to kind of keep it going. Trevor Lawrence was banged up. This offensive line was banged up. This defense was average to okay, not really great. And so I think just at the end of the year, some of their holes got exposed due to injury. And I think that they could end up surprising some people and coming back to win this division. So I think. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just like,
Oh,
I
okay.
agree.
But I think that's going to wrap up this video here. If you guys have not already, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below on what you thought of the Jacksonville Jaguars 2024 offseason. Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you have done differently? And on that, we will see you guys.